Hi, this is Kevin with Map Practical. This is for the Advanced Cartographic Design Lab 4, and there might be a couple parts to this one, but part 1 is all about setting up the project. We're going to be making a duplicate. We're trying to emulate this beautiful National Park Service map done by Tom Patterson of Denali National Park up in Alaska. So one of the best ways to learn good cartographic practices is to try and emulate the masters, and boy, this one sure will challenge everybody who gives it a go. All right, so let's escape from that, and we'll just close that one up. So obviously we're going to start out in our catalog, and I give you guys a folder, and it's got some data including instructions. It's got some color ramps in there, some Hillshade tools, and some Denali data including a DEM and some land cover, and then all the vectors that you will need. So you don't even need to start a new geodatabase. You can just use the one provided. So the Hillshade tools is an old set of tools that comes from Esri from way back in 9.3, but it works now, and it includes a multi-directional Hillshade and a Swiss Hillshade, and we're going to take a look. You really need to have these folders, the scratch and the tool data, and then the README text is also very valuable. So let's just start up a new ArcMap. We'll wait for that for a second. So I'm going to demo today kind of setting up the project and how you can make a perfectly good relief inside of ArcGIS, right? And then part 2, we're going to go ahead and actually create relief in Photoshop, and you'll see the power of Photoshop. So it looks like I've already set it up for the Denali National Park to be my default geodatabase. That's definitely what you want to do. And then what is also helpful, if you go under File, and then Map Document Properties, I always check this box to store relative path names. And here's where you could set up that geodatabase again if you needed to. I'm going to go ahead and just make sure it's set to that Denali National Park. Say OK. All right, and then I'm going to add some data. And all I'm going to add today to start is just the DEM. And it's going to come in pretty wanky. There you go. So it's just in NAT83. So we can take a look at the layers. You see that it's just in NAT83. I've clipped it from a projected data frame in a perfect square, which is why it looks funky right now. When you're using a DEM to generate shaded relief, you have a couple of options. Probably the best, most attractive option is just to leave it in the projection and coordinate system it's in, and then do your shaded relief, hill shading, and so forth while it's still in its original coordinate systems. And then you can reproject the outputs to your final needs for your map, right? The other option is to project everything at the same time before you start the project, but rasters can be a little trickier, so I usually go with the raw data. Okay, next thing we need to do is open up our toolbox over here. Let's see if I can get it to open up. What's going on? There we go. And we're going to add a toolbox. We're going to add that Hillshade toolbox. You just right-click on Toolbox, you say Add, and then navigate to your folder. And then this Hillshade Tools 9.3, we're just going to add it. And then we'll open up again, and there we go. And inside of that, you'll see 2 models. Now, Model Builder is really a powerful tool. If you've never used it, it's just a way where you can basically use a GUI interface that is like a flow chart to connect multiple tools and run through multiple analysis processes at once. The Swiss Hillshade is going to be the one we're going to be working with. So I'm going to right-click on it and go to Edit just so you can see the whole thing. So here we have it, and I'll stretch this out so you can see it on screen. And there's a bunch of toolbars here. If we go to full extent, it'll make it big so you can see what happens. So basically the Swiss Hillshade model tries to give you a nice hillshade that also has an aerial perspective, which will highlight the highlands and try to give you a little bit more light in the valleys, and kind of give you a little bit of that diffuse light like you would see naturally in the landscape where you have a little bit of haze up in the higher mountains, right? So there's always an input DEM, a Z-factor change, and then it runs a hillshade on that, and then it does some focal statistics, and then it adds it back to the default hillshade to give you an aerial perspective. And then the standard DEM is also divided by a certain constant, and then that is added again to give you another, what we call a filtered hillshade. You can do this without managing any of the things inside of here just by running it based on the P's, and the P stands for parameter, and I'm going to show you that in a second. But on all the models, blue is the input, yellows are the tools, and the green is the output data, or it can be the intermediate data. So let's just close this, and I'm going to double click on it and it'll open up. Because there was parameters set, this tool will pop up with the parameters. So now I'm just going to set my original DEM, and I'm going to leave these outputs to go into that tool data Scratch workspace. So if you just leave the folder as I've given it to you, it will run. Of course, you could create a new place to put this stuff or even put it into your geodata bus, but we're just going to go with the defaults. The one thing to think about though is this Z factor. Z factor is a correction factor on the hillshade if your XY coordinates are different than your Z coordinates or the elevation coordinates. You can see on this guy that this goes from 45 up to 6,188. If you know anything about Denali, Denali is like 20,320 feet high, so this is obviously in meters. If something is in Nat 83, it's in degrees, and it could be in feet or meters, but you'd have to dig into the coordinate system. This just means that the XY coordinates aren't going to be the same. So you have to actually change the Z factor. One that works almost all the time is 0.123 zeros and a 3. Now where this comes from is the latitude of the area that you're working on. If you go ahead and click on the setting the Z factor parameter correctly, unfortunately it takes you to an older 404 error on the Esri website. But if you just type this into their search, it'll take you to the blog post that tells you exactly what correction you should put in for what latitude you are on. It turns out that for this we're at like 62 or so up. You probably would go with a 000, so 4 zeros, and a 179, but I found that the 3 tends to work a little bit better for this particular one. So let's just let it rip. Get a drink of water. So it's running through the focal statistics and doing all those things that we looked at inside the model. There we go. And it's complete. We'll close it off. Okay, so it added two things. It added an aerial perspective and a filtered hillshade. I'm going to go ahead and bring my DEM on top, turn it off for a second, and go down to my filtered hillshade. Now with most hillshades, it's not what you want to avoid is this super dark black areas, but this is really high latitudes and super steep mountains. This is like Mount Foraker and Mount McKinley, Denali, right? So they're very high and they do block the sun for much of the year, but we can clean this up. But first thing I want to do is I just want to go ahead and project this thing now. So now that we've run our hillshade tool, we'll project it. Now you could also try to run that multi-directional hillshade on the same DEM and you'll get another thing kicked out at you. It just takes a little bit while, so I'm not going to run it now, but that's certainly another hillshade that you could throw into your mix. So what we're going to end up doing is instead of, oops, I'm going to collapse that. Instead of just having one hillshade and then your DEM over the top of it, we're going to stack multiple different layers to get a really clean relief look. Okay, but so let's go ahead and project this thing. So we're going to go into our coordinate system tab, and I'm just going to type in Alaska. And it'll give me a few options. And then under projected coordinate systems, state systems, the one we're looking for is this NAT 83 NSRS 2007 Albers meter. Okay, and that's the one we want. And when we hit apply, don't warn me again on this, boom, there we go. Looking pretty good. So now it's at least square. So see, I already clipped it to a square. Once it's projected, it comes back. Problem is it's tilted a little bit. So that the problem with that is the central meridian. So we just need to kind of hover over here. And it looks like if we go -50, yeah, -150, that we can clean it up and straighten it out. So we'll do that. We're going to right click on this guy and say copy and modify. And we're just copying the central meridian of the projection. So we'll take this to -150. Don't need all of those zeros. And I always throw mod on the end, just so I know it's a modified projection. Say OK, and OK. There we go. So now we have a straight version. And now, if we zoom in, we're going to take care of this kind of dark and a little bit pixelated looking shaded relief. So if we go to the display tab first on our bottom one, I always resample all of my rasters to bilinear interpolation, which will just smooth them out. Okay, and then under symbology, I want to change this so we're not going from a dark, deep black to white. It's going to be somewhere in between. So if I right click and look at the properties for this ramp, I'm going to go with 2 color, and then I'm going to change this guy to somewhere in the grays. If I was just doing one shaded relief, Hillshade, I would probably go with 50% gray, but since I know I'm going to be stacking 2, and then I'm also going to be putting the DEM on top of it, I'm going to try something like 30 or 20. Let's try 30, right? So it's all about this glass half full. If you have 100% black in your first DEM and you stack another black DEM over the top of that and then another, then you've got way too much density and there's no room to put all your type and your vector line work over the top of it. So remember, with shaded relief, we want light and subtle. So there we go. And then if we hit apply, you see that helped it a little bit. Now, you can go with percent clip. You could even apply a gamma stretch, but really you just need to play with this with each one of your different reliefs. So standard deviations at around 2.5 used to be what I went to all the time. With or without a gamma stretch, you can try that. But what I've been getting pretty good results lately out of is a histogram equalize. See, it's a little too dark at first. Oops, excuse me. Minimum maximum with a, there we go. And then apply a gamma stretch. And that one looks okay. So you just got to play with them a little bit, but you'll see what happens. So now we're going to put our aerial perspective over the top. Obviously too dark. We're going to do the same thing. So hopefully you know that over here on the symbology, you can right click and uncheck this graphic view, and then you actually see the words. So if I were to go in here and do properties and color and then change this to 30% gray and say okay, and then right click on it and say save to style, it's going to save it. And so this is, instead of black to white, this is 30 gray to white, and get rid of it. And this is going to save it in my personal style, and I'll show you the styles in a second here. We'll say okay, and then we'll hit apply on that one. All right, so that's a little bit better, and then you can play with your percent clip. I find that this one works okay for the aerial perspective. Let me go to the display tab. Going to definitely do a bilinear interpolation. And then this one I'm going to do a transparency of about 45. And let's take a look. So now we're already starting to get a much better looking shaded relief, right? So we've pulled out some of those dark areas and really given it a little bit more texture. Okay? All right. So Hillshade is the model of light over the landscape, and then the hypsometric tint is usually the original DEM draped right over the top of the hillshade. So by linear interpolation, we're going to go with 45 again here. And then over here in the symbology, instead of just plain old black, we're going to try and choose something that's at least close to a natural color. And there you go, right? I don't really like it so much though. All the relief, or excuse me, the color ramps inside of Arc as defaults, they're not my favorite. They just don't look great. You can play with it and you could probably get it there if you wanted to. But most of them just are more for thematic mapping and they don't really mimic a natural landscape. So we'll go to like one of the better ones. Here we go. So this is pretty good. So it gives you a chance to kind of try and figure out what you want. Let's try maybe like a minimum maximum. So that's just too little in the high ground. So we do a gamma stretch. That'll give us a little bit more. How about if we went to 2 on that? Yeah, getting there. So if we went to 3. All right, maybe something along those lines. So a little bit of a stretch across everything, but that's not going to be the one that we're going to keep as far as colors go. So you can add your own styles. If I go into Customize, oops, excuse me, Style Manager, and then inside of this right here, you'll see this is my user styles. I've only created one. It was that color ramp, right? That gray to white. And I already have a Denali ramp 2 in there that I created earlier. I'm going to add a new style though so you can see. So I'm going to go to Styles. I'm going to go Add Style to List. And then inside that folder of data I give you, I have a folder called Color Ramps. And these are old color ramps that Ezra used to provide, but they're kind of hard to find. So these are kind of like legacy data that I'm going to give to everybody. So let's look at their hypsometry style. We'll say Open, and we'll say OK. And now you'll see that we've added this extra style. And if I hit the plus, only the folders that are colored are the ones that there is something in, and this one only contained color ramps. But if we go in there, look at all these cool styles we have now. We've got bathymetry, we've got continental Europe, Southwest United States, desert colors, the whole 9 yards. So looking really, really cool. So now if we go ahead and instead of looking at just the colors, if we right click on this guy and say uncheck the graphic view, now you're going to see all those new styles. So there we go, North America, San Bernardino, Palm Springs, Sierra Nevada. Let's try that. All right. quite the bright style, but we can work with it. It turns out the one that I like though, the one that I've made, is the Denali style. So let's find that in here, and it's going to be alphabetical. Denali ramp 2. So there we go, and let's hit that guy. Ah, there we go. So now we've got kind of a gray to snowy in the Alaska range, and then greens going down to dark greens out in the tundra. That's exactly what I was looking for. So how is this made? Well, if you right click on a style and go to properties, it brings up this edit color ramp. And basically this guy is made of 3 of these algorithmic color ramps, right? So the first one goes from one color green, and you can look at it here, from one color green to the next. And then you would make another one. You could actually add another metric color ramp, and it's going to start with the green that the other one left off on. And let's say we wanted to not go to gray, but we wanted to go to a little bit of like icy blue, right? And then we hit OK. And then we open up this other one's properties, and we're going to have the 2 color going to white, and then we're going to start with that same icy blue, this silver light blue. And now you'll see that that is going to completely change the look of the map, right? Now that might be a little bit much, but you could play with it until you get it back to where you want it. I'm going to go back to my original one. Now see, it created a second ramp with that guy, so I'm going to save it. Save the style, and I'm going to make this ramp 3. And apply. Cool. But I'm going to go back to ramp 2 because I just think ramp 2 was pretty close to what I'm hoping for. There we go. All right, so already you've got a shader relief that would be probably better than most you would see in a normal shader relief coming directly out of Arc, just by doing a little bit of mixing. But we can break this up and make it even cooler. One thing I want to do though is save, so that's always helpful. Save early, save often. Let's see if we can go home now. I'm going to have to play around and go into the thing here. Where is it going to be? How about this PC? There we go. Now we can get there. This is Denali. This is 2020 that we're working on this one. Super. And now I'm going to go into layout view. By the time you're getting here, you should probably get into layout view. I'm going to customize this page. So I'm going to go up to File and go to Page and Print Setup. And I made this whole thing to set it up as a 12 by 12 map. So what we're looking for is to use these paper settings, and we're going to go with a 13 by 13 inch. Oh, I think I'm going to have to uncheck that. There we go. So a 13 by 13 inch width and height, because we're going to have half-inch margins all around. So let's go ahead and wrap that. Great. And now we're going to set our guides at 1/2 inches all the way around, so 12 and a half and a half down here, and then just stretch the data frame to fit that guy. And then it turns out that if we were to zoom in until we're at 1 to 750, that's the proper scale for this to work out just perfect. So you can see that when we projected it, we got a little bit of a curve, and that's just because we're at such a high latitude. But you can use the data frame to help you. Oops, doesn't look like I stretched it all the way over here. There we go. You can use the data frame to kind of help hide some of that. So I'll just get my hand tool, and I'll just bake it till we barely are seeing any of the curve. There we go. So it's mostly gone at the top, but there's a little left at the bottom. And what you can do is you'll just be able to hide that in Illustrator. So once we get to Illustrator, we'll just make a little bit of a neat line around the map and clean that up. All right, and I'm going to save. Now, we know that we're going to export this thing out to Illustrator. We might go back and forth a couple times with Arc. You can either do the move where you do everything in Arc first, export all of your rasters as TIFFs for your blend in Photoshop, or if you're happy with the blend inside of Arc, just do one TIFF and then one export to AI for all your vectors. But what happens if you have to come back into Arc and you need to work up some more data and you want it to line up? Well, this data frame, this is your friend. This is your registration frame that will allow you to put any new data into Adobe Illustrator and have it line right up. The thing is, once you're getting to this mode, you can't afford to move the map within the data frame at all or change the scale. So once you're getting close, I would highly recommend going to the layers and then going to the data frame, and under extent, just tell it to fixed extent, okay? And now we're locked. You can see that the scale is locked and all the zoom tools are locked. But because we're in layout view, we can zoom in and out on the page, and you can still use the layout tools to go to a whole page, but you're not going to be messing up the data. This way, no matter what, that data frame is going to be your registration frame inside of Illustrator. Okay, so let's go ahead and add something else to kind of break up this green. We have a nice land cover data set, so let's do that. Let's insert that, go up into the Denali National Park and inside of this data. And oops, I'm sorry, that was actually, it's another raster, so we're going to use this land cover raster right here. And we'll add it, and it's going to come in awful, right? But that's just because of the colors. So what we can do is go inside of this guy, and then tell it to color map, and then import color map. And then navigate to the folder that I gave you, and I give you a landcover.clr. And that's just a color layer that's going to give you the colors that were supposed to be represented in the National Land Cover data set. And now, when we hit apply, much better, right? I also, inside that folder, there's a README. And that README has what the codes stand for all these different things. Like the 11 stands for open water, the 12 stands for ice and glaciers, right? So there's all these different things. And so what we want to do is just get rid of some of the extras. So it turns out that I know I don't want my open water because I'm going to have a vector of lakes. I don't want the ice and the moraines. I don't want any of these pink red guys because those are development. 31 is one I don't want. But I do want a lot of these greens and browns down here. Don't want these couple of blacks, or 90 and 95. So I'm going to say remove those and then hit apply. Okay, so just what we were looking for is to break up that tundra. Looks like we've got that. Looks like we got a little bit of, oh no, that's right. And then we go over here to our display, bilinear interpolation, and then let's make this thing really transparent, like 85, and see how it looks. See, it just broke it up just a little bit. I'll turn it on and off so you can see it. It's just a hypsometric tint, which just goes color equals elevation, to breaking it up by land cover, right? And we could even go a little bit more transparent. What if we went to 90? There we go. So in that land cover data set, when you read the README, it will tell you what code is for glaciers. I went ahead and just selected by glacier, exported it out, and then converted raster to vector, so a polygon or a raster to polygon, and that created a little vector of, say, the glaciers. So I'm going to add those now. And there's my glaciers. And then they come in, and of course they're vectors, and they come in a standard color, which is puke, but we can fix that, obviously. So we're going to go with white for the glacial color with no outline color. And we're also going to probably need to go into the display, and we'll change that transparency. We'll make it like, I don't know, 40% transparent. There you go. So already we're starting to build something that looks pretty cool. Unfortunately, a little bit of the green is coming through from our hypsometric tint. And there are ways that you could get rid of that in here, or you could just try to break it up so you don't see it as much. Well, I've also pulled out the moraines, so let's do that. Let's grab the moraines. Oops. Great. And we'll go ahead and make those guys one color, like a kind of a dark gray, and say OK. And then, of course, we're going to have to make those transparent too. And we're going to make them really transparent, like 90%. Let's see if they show up. Yep, so there we go. So now when we zoom in, you'll see we got a little bit of moraines on the glaciers. It's looking pretty good, right? So if we zoom back out to our whole map, and it's not absolutely 100% ideal. It looks all right. I'm kind of stoked on it. But I know that if I take it into Photoshop, I can do so much more. But if you're just trying to do a down and dirty relief inside of Arc and Arc alone, this can work really well for you. And remember, you're going to be putting vector line work all around this thing, a bunch of labels on it and so forth. So this could actually work out pretty good. There's one other trick you could try. You could try to clip out a shaded relief layer like this filtered hillshade just by the glaciers and then stick it in between them up here so that you don't get any of the green coming out. So let's try that. Let's just go to search, and we're going to do an extract. So remember, extract by mask is just the clip tool for rasters. So extract by mask, there we go. And what we're going to extract from is this filtered hillshade. and we're going to use our glaciers as the cookie cutter, and we're going to make sure it's going into our Denali National Park geodatabase, and this is extract glacial relief, relief, and we'll hit all right and let it rip. And it's probably going to put it on top looking kind of dark. Actually, it stuck it underneath the glaciers, which isn't too bad. Let's turn those off in the moraines and just take a look at it. All right, so it's got those issues, but we know how to fix those, right? So we're going to go into display. It's going to be by linear interpolation. We're going to go to symbology, and we want that gray style that we created. Oops, so instead of just doing that, we'll turn off the graphics, and then we're going to look for the gray to white. Gray to light. Try that. See how that looks. That doesn't look that good. Let's fix it. Maybe it's best just sometimes to... Oh, there it is, 30% gray to white. That's the one I was looking for. There we go. So now, I'm going to zoom in on this, and you'll see what we have is we have the shaded relief of just the glaciers up over the top, right? And so then when we put the white over the glaciers, they pop back up, and then the moraines, and there we go. All right, so let's zoom out. So that made it look pretty all right. You know, we could probably live with this if we had to. There's a lot you can do. You can get in there and play with brightness and contrast and really work it up. But as far as a relief down and dirty inside of ArcGIS, this could totally work, right? So we'll save it. And then if this was going to be our background, if this was going to be just a one-shot relief, we didn't have time to do a bunch of blends in Photoshop, we would just make sure there's no vectors turned on, and we'd go to File, Export Map, and export this guy out as a TIFF because it's going to be lossless, at least 300 dpi, but if you're making a nice big map, maybe you want to bump it up to like something like 600, right? And that's going to be super high definition. You're not going to see any pixels in it, and this is going to be your Denali 2020 relief. And make sure it's going, oops, well, got rid of the whole entire word there. Denali relief. So we'll try that, and then make sure it's going in the right folder. So what's the home one on this guy? There we go. Boom. All right. So that's exporting out a nice high-resolution single TIFF. It's going to have the black line around the edges, which is going to be your data frame. And then what you're going to do is turn off all of the rasters, add your vector line work in here, work that all up, making sure you're dissolving things, adding the labels you need, so on and so forth, and then exporting out one AI, and then you'll be able to line those vectors up with this raster inside of Illustrator and get to work with doing your styles and your labeling there. All right, so that's all I have for you. If you like this one, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. The next one, I'm going to show you how to export every one of these rasters out on their own and then load them into Photoshop as a stack and use the power of Photoshop to blend these and get an even cooler looking final output. All right, that's all I have. Take care.